how pleased I am that you invited me to come here, because I really feel that what I would like to talk about is something to be shared. Because by doing that, the people who do this work, and that's not just me, gain great strength from knowing a lot of other people support them and are praying for it. And I'm one of those people who Duncan was talking about earlier today, who don't feel that they have this ability to do something. I'm not particularly good at expressing myself with my thought processes, but I am quite good at using these. And these give me an opportunity to do something for other people. And that's what I want to talk about today. But first of all, I would like you to listen to a piece of music, because in a way, what the words of this song say to us is what I heard when I was asked to go to Riga and help these people. I'm going to start that again because it seems to be going twice.
Could you make sure that the plug is plugged in?
Yep. Yep, that is. Okay. Should be going. Can I just beg your indulgence? I'm going to start this properly, because that sounds horrible and you won't hear what I want to get across. Is it on yet? Okay, I'm going to abandon that. I'm going to abandon that because you can't hear it, but basically what the song is about by Christadelphian from Australia is that we really need Jesus Christ back, and the people that really need Jesus back are the ones who are the most desperate in society. They need him more than the rest of us do. That's because those of us who Duncan talked about yesterday are millionaires. We actually think, in some terms, that we have everything in this life already. The world out there, and sometimes us included, think that we've got what we need already. But people who have absolutely nothing know that the only thing that is worthwhile for them, once they come into contact with it, is God's truth. And then they actually understand that they are millionaires, as Duncan said last night. So, this is the Riga Bible Centre. Now, rather than me tell you why that's there, I want to tell you why there's a problem in Riga. And it's something which the people who we try and help have no control over. I'll just give you a little bit of potted history. If we go back to the last World War, the Second World War, the Germans took control of Latvia. They were then thrown out by the Russians when the Russians started winning in the Eastern Front and swept into Germany. So the Russians now control Latvia. they bring in, and this is 1943, from that point on, they bring in lots of workers to run the factories which they start building and the farms which they start creating, and they bring in the workers who are Russians, because as far as they're concerned, they're the better workers. So the Latvians are like second-class citizens already. Then the Soviet Union falls apart, and the Latvians decide in 1991 that they're going to have their own state, regardless of what Russia says. And by 1992, this is the effect. The Latvians are seen as their own people, living in their own country, Latvia. Problem is, there's all these Russians there. Some of them managed to go home, but a whole raft of these Russians, Russia says, you were born in Latvia, so therefore you're not coming back to Russia. The Latvian government said, actually, you're children of the Russians that were brought here, so we don't want you here, you can go back to Russia. So you've got this two sides not being interested in the people in the middle. The people in the middle don't matter. This is about politics. So you've got this stateless people sitting in a country which doesn't want them, unable to go back to a country which they feel ethnically they're part of, so they're totally rejected by everybody. The rest of the world is not interested. They're just left in this dangling situation. The jobs they had when they were there have gone because Russia's pulled out, so all the companies that ran there have all started to collapse in on themselves because there's nobody to run them. So their incomes disappear. The people who had jobs in things like universities and the civil service, as we might call it, find that they're out of a job because the Latvians don't want them there. They were going to give their own people those jobs. So even very highly educated people are no longer employable, and yet they cannot leave. They're stuck in this place. They don't have a passport except for one that says stateless, which means they can go back to Russia for perhaps a couple of weeks for a holiday, but they have to come back to Latvia, but they cannot go anywhere else at all. So what do you think happens to a group of people who now have no income? They have no pensions, they have nothing to provide. They end up living on the street. That is the only resource they have. Now, at this point in time, they are literally living on the street. When they decide to join the EU, the economic union that's in Europe, the EU decide that this is not right. They ask the Latvians to do something about it and put in place some measures that give these non-state people rights. But the Latvians are not interested, and they sort of say, yes, okay, but they don't actually do anything about it. So in the end, the EU gives each one of these Russians, who is stateless, 10 euros. Now, I'm not sure what that is in dollars, but it's not more than about $12 or $14 a month to live on. Now, I don't know about you, but I doubt that you could live a week on $10 or $12, could you? Let alone they've got it for a month. So, that's the background. Now, where this is I'll give you a bit of background information, because I know, and I'm sort of joking with you a moment, I know that Americans don't know anywhere else in the world other than America. But Latvia is up there in the Baltic, and Riga is over there, you can see it in the centre. Latvia, right on the coast of the Baltic Sea. Now the Bible Centre is on the west bank of the river, the big river that runs up into the sea, and the old town of Riga, and the main building area for people to live in is over here, predominantly over here, although this area here is also populated, but most people live over this side. It takes about 20 minutes to get from the red dot over to the purple dot up there by bus. When the Riga Bible School started through Duncan, it started in his house. And he told you last night, and mentioned it again today, that they had an English-speaking language school working using the Bible to teach people how to speak English. One of the people that came to get a free Bible was this homeless lady, who was then baptised and started bringing lots of others. So they had to move out of Duncan's house. So they moved to where it says First Regal Bible Centre was, in a basement accommodation, but it wasn't very good. It didn't have much of a kitchen, but they decided at this point they needed to provide some food for these people, because they were coming to Bible classes hungry, because they didn't have any way of buying any food. So that's the scenario. They then outgrew that first Bible Centre and they moved up to the purple one at the top, which is what you've just seen in the pictures already. Now, the hall itself is divided up into two. One half of it, if we take this half, all the way down is for talks, and that's set up permanently for talks. This half is set up for eating, and there's tables you can see. Sorry, I haven't shown it to you yet. You can see tables all the way, and then at the far end there's a coffee and tea area, and at this end, on this one, all the toilets are up that end as well. So that's the space that brothers and sisters and interested friends have to use every time they come. Now, I said to you that I was asked to go and do this. Mike and Vanessa Bowler, some good friends of ours, went out to see Duncan and saw that there was a need to help, because Duncan and Cindy were feeding about 60 to 80 people for 2 days a week, every week of the year, for I'm not sure how many years they did it for, but at least 5 before anything else was happening. That is a lot of work in itself, just Duncan and Cindy doing it. Mike and Vanessa saw that there was a need for other people to get involved. They did it for a trial period 1 year, and then they asked us to help them. And I thought, here's a call to do something. I can use my hands to do this, because it's kitchen work. I'll go and do it. But God had other ideas. And Duncan said, well, actually, because I'm doing the talks on the Sunday and the Monday, I cannot spare enough time to do the talks on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday as well. So one of you 4 are going to have to do the talks. And it fell to me by the other 3 that it was me that was going to be doing the talks. So here's me now in a position of doing something that I don't think I'm particularly good at. And I have to step up to the plate. But the thing is that when we step out of the comfort zone, like Peter did in the boat when Jesus walked up to it in the storm on the water, and Peter says, "Call me out of the boat." And Jesus says, "Come to me, Peter." Amazing things happen. Peter was able to walk on the water because he had the faith to ask Jesus to call him out of the boat. The rest of the disciples stayed in the boat. They didn't exercise their faith, they just stayed in the boat. But it was Peter who went out and tested his faith on the water. And I think that God, if we are prepared to put ourselves in that position, will use us, if our motivation is right, to do things that we can never do ourselves. He will use us. And I think you have seen today through what Duncan has talked about, that God has done amazing things in Duncan's life. And I know that from the time that I've spent in Latvia so far, that God is very visible if you look for him and you do things which you never thought were possible. And I shall talk about some of those later. Now, we decided to go for 3 months, January, February and March. And the reason is, these are the coldest times of the year. Duncan has talked to you already, if you remember, about some of the temperatures. He mentioned -30. And in a country which is not like Jamaica or Guyana, -30 is cold. It is very cold. And I tell you how cold it is. The river that runs through Riga is probably 300 to 400 metres wide. It's fresh water running into salt water because the Baltic Sea is salt water. So it's a mixture at this point. In 3 days, when we were there this winter, that river froze solid in just 3 days. That's how cold it is. And it's a free running river, running from the highlands out to sea. 3 days only to make that solid enough to walk on, sit on, make holes in and fish through and ice skate on. That's how cold it gets. We asked, the 4 of us decided we couldn't do this on our own, we needed some extra help. So we asked some other people that we knew to come and help us in the kitchen. And we had some people come from New Zealand, we had some people come from Australia, and we had some people come from France and a lot from England. And we could not have done it without them. And we decided to live together and share the experience together, working together, as well as working at the Bible Centre. As you can imagine, when you're talking about feeding 60 to 80 people, that's a lot of food, even for just one meal. So the shopping becomes quite a task. We used to have 2 of the big, deep shopping trolleys that we took round, and we filled it up with all sorts of things. So we used to shop on Saturday for Sundays. We shopped on Mondays for Mondays and Tuesdays, and Wednesdays for Wednesdays and Thursdays. Now you might say, why didn't you do it all in one go? Well, the health issues don't allow you to. If you buy fresh meat, you have to use it the day you buy it, or at least the next day. You can't keep it for the rest of the week. So you're forced to shop 3 times a week anyway. And also it saves the problem of having issues over contaminated food. Because without doubt, the authorities in Riga were on our case. When we went, because we were going to be feeding people, we had to have a medical passport. We had to go to the doctors, have a chest x-ray, and the chest x-ray was so that we didn't give the Latvians tuberculosis in case we came there with it. Now, tuberculosis in Latvia is rife. Loads of people have got it, and they have used penicillin so much that it is now immune to penicillin. So if you've got it, you've got it, and there's no getting rid of it. But we had to be checked to make sure we weren't bringing it there. We also had to do stool samples to make sure we hadn't got any other issues, and go and see a doctor and have a medical check and sort it out at the end as well. Plus the fact that we were given kitchen checks whenever they wanted to turn up. We didn't know when they were going to come. And every day you had to completely clean down the kitchen before you started and after you finished. And every month we had to completely strip the kitchen, wash the ceilings, the walls, all the units, empty the fridge, empty the cooker out, clean absolutely everything and sign it off. Because if you give one person who is living on the street an upset stomach, you are responsible for that. And you don't want to have that held against you. They would just shut it down completely if you did that. So it was quite... It costs about 50 cents and that's euro cents, not dollars, to feed one individual for one meal. So over a meal, if we had what we expected, 60 to 80 people turn up, it would cost about 60 euros to feed that group of people. Now you multiply that by 5 for the 5 days, and then you multiply that by the number of weeks, it adds up to a lot of money. There's also electricity, water, heating, air filtering that has to be paid for. The on-running costs are enormous really on this. Now, we are blessed by God because that money has come in, and we set up a special charity for doing that. But I'll talk about that in a minute. You might ask, why do we have a meal? Why not just give them a Bible talk? Why not just have the breaking of bread for the brothers and sisters who were there? And Duncan said yesterday, there's probably about 200-300 brothers and sisters that can turn up. Well, actually, if you remember what it says in your Bible, it says that the Pharisees said that Jesus was a drunkard and a glutton. Why was he a drunkard and a glutton in their eyes? Because he ate lots of food and drank lots with lots of people. He saw this as a really good way of communicating his message. He fed 4,000 men at one time and 5,000 men at another time, plus women and children. He saw sharing food at a meal something worth doing, and he went to the Pharisees' house to share a meal with them on lots of occasions because it was a good way of discussing things that you might not agree on. People have food as it's like a protection. If somebody comes to your home in some countries and you invite them for a meal, it says you're safe when you're with me as I'm providing this food. I'm not going to kill you at this point. I might kill you tomorrow when I see you on the road, but if you're around my table, you're safe. That's what a meal says. So if Jesus can be called a drunkard and a glutton, I don't mind being called that to feed these people, because they need physical food as well as spiritual food. Both are important. You can't live if you don't have physical food. And if you can't live, you can't learn the gospel. It is important. Somebody has said to me, I don't like preaching by McDonald's. In other words, giving somebody a meal to listen to a message. But as you can see from here, they come 2 hours before the meal. They have an hour when they can have coffee and communicate with each other. They then have another hour when they do a Bible study, and only then do they get a meal. And I can guarantee to you that during the 3 months and a half that I've been there since we started this, that nobody came for just the meal. They were all there at the beginning. Duncan has talked about baptisms, and it says in your programme that in the Riga Bible Centre, over the period that it's been open, that there has been on average, since it started, at least one baptism a week. Over the number of years, how many other places do you get such a consistent number of baptisms? And I think that alone speaks for itself. This is something which is a need that has to be addressed. So, on Mondays to Thursdays it's slightly different because there's no breaking of bread, and it starts in the afternoon but goes on later into the evening. Now, the reason why it starts relatively early and finishes relatively early is that most of the people that come live in the night shelters that are now provided, and they are provided only because the EU insisted that these shelters were created to give these people somewhere to live. And the queue up prior to 8 o'clock, because at 8 o'clock the doors open and they can rush in and find somewhere to sleep. And I'll talk about the night shelters later. But the clearing up. You have, well, we were told when we started 60 to 80 people expect, but you never know from day to day how many are going to come. And you do not know how many people you're going to feed until the very last moment by the time you've finished the talks. The first night we did it, we had 120, not 60 to 80. And we thought, is the food going to go round? Because you've already cooked the food. It's taken since 2 o'clock to prepare it. So there's no way you're going to add any more. It's too late. Tell you, we took those three saucepans out with a ladle. You can't say, oh, hang on a minute, let's fill up all the bowls for 120 and see how it goes round, then pour some in from this one and pour some into that one to make all the same. You start and you give the first person a ladleful and you keep going. And I tell you, God worked that day, because that ladle kept going till they'd all had seconds. And I'm absolutely convinced there was not enough food to feed them all, because we'd only prepared enough food for 60 to 80 and we'd fed 120. And when you look at what God does and you think, how's this happened? And you realise that it's God doing it. It's not you that's been able to adjust what you're passing out to make it go. It's a miracle. God does work when he knows it's something worth doing. When people need food to survive, to hear his message, he will make sure they get the food that they need. This is the sort of food that we're preparing. What we need is, because of time constraints and then getting away, they have to come and get their food at one go. So they have a bowl of food, they have a piece of bread, and if we're doing a sweet, They can take it all at the same time. So they leave, sit down and take their whole meal. We try and use as healthy products as we can. So lots of vegetables, lots of added sour cream and things like that, because in a cold climate, one way of actually helping the body to survive is to give it lots of grease or oils in it, because it helps to bulk up the fat, and it actually works. So we add lots of sour cream to everything. It makes it very rich, and they actually love that sort of food anyway. And we add lots of herbs and things in which they love, because if they get food elsewhere, it's going to be really cheap food which isn't particularly fresh or nice, but it certainly won't have lots of herbs and vegetables in it. It'll be processed food. So there should be less.
Would you like to try some?
So, would you like to try some? I tell you what, it was absolutely lovely, because Vanessa, that's Vanessa in the picture, she was in charge of the food menus and the main person in charge of the cooking. And for Vanessa, everything has to be perfect. There's no good enough. Doesn't matter who these people are, she would cook the same meal for the Queen if she turned up as she would for these people. It doesn't matter. Everything that you've got goes into cooking this food, which is exactly what God would like us to do. Treat everybody the same. Here's a food queue starting. There's Mike with his urns. He was always in charge of the coffee and tea beforehand. That's my wife Mel here on the left, and Vanessa next to her, just starting to dish up the first part of the queue. Now, this here is a queue in operation. You get a sense of it. Right. And just now, this one is seconds. You can see the difference because they've actually already got their bowls. So you see, I'm not exaggerating, he thought that was good. He said, yeah, I want some more, please. But it doesn't stop there, because you've now got to clear up. You've fed up to 150 people, because that's the maximum now that we've had wanting a meal on a particular day. And you've got to clear everything up. The one thing I am good at is washing up. I did it every day. So there were only 90 people that day that turned up. But you got 90 bowls, 90 spoons, 90 probably 180 cups or mugs to wash up. You've got all the saucepans, you've got all the cooking utensils to wash up, clean the cooker, and then when you've done that, floor's got to be cleaned and all the tops have got to be cleaned down, and then you go outside and the hall's got to be hoovered because you don't know what these people have brought in with them, so you make sure you hoover it all up. The eating area has to be mopped down because again you need to make sure it's hygienic, clean for the next day. All the tables need cleaning down, the toilets need cleaning. You're talking about several hours work after you finish feeding people. Now I'm not trying to put you off, I'm just trying to say to you that all this stuff is done because these people are worth it. And it's the only way you can look at it, is that these people are being shown love by the fact that you are there cleaning a floor or providing the food, and they appreciate it. Now, actually, I'll go back to that picture there. You've seen that guy in some of the pictures already, haven't you? That's Pasha. Now, he's a very quiet man. He doesn't say very much, and he just sits down once he's arrived, and he's nearly always, as you can see up in that top picture there, one of the first people to arrive long before the hall's open. Some of them turn up an hour before the hall's open because they've got nothing else to do. So they will either walk from where their hostel is, or they will get a bus if they can, and they will turn up when the time is there, and they'll talk to each other outside. He comes in, he'll have his coffee, and he'll sit down and just get a bit warm, and then he'll go and get a dustpan and a brush, and he will go outside and he will sweep up all round the hall outside, because Latvians take a pride in their environment, and you see people in blocks of flats outside sweeping up the pavement, making sure there's no rubbish around and it looks pristine. He does that for the hall every day that he's there. And in the winter, when it's snowing, he will take a shovel outside and he will shovel the snow off the pavement so that nobody, and make sure there's no ice. He puts salt down to make sure everybody's safe to walk up and down. That's his job in his mind, and he does that as a thank you for what he is given by the community of that church in Riga. Bible time. As I said to you, Duncan speaks on Sundays and Mondays, as he does for the whole year. But we felt for this 3 months that it was beyond him to do these other 3 days, so we had to take the task on. Mel and I ended up doing Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, and Mel, my wife, is very good musically, and we used music as part of it. Now, when we first went there, Duncan said, "Oh, Mel, go and play guitar. They'll listen to you as you sing your songs in English to them, but they won't really join in. Russians are listeners." Well, Duncan was wrong. Because when Mel played the guitar and sung some songs, some of them got up and they were jiving and they were really enjoying it. And you could see their faces starting to light up. So we thought when we went for this long period of time, this was very important that we actually continued to do this and plugged into this enthusiasm they had. So every day we add a period of music, and they really enjoyed it. We split the hour then between sort of, if the talk was 40 minutes, we had 20 minutes for music or whatever split it was. And alternate weeks we showed them films. Films based on things like Esther's life, Jeremiah, Paul, and Amazing Grace, which is about William Wilberforce's fight to get rid of slavery. They really connected with that film. That was really interesting. All of which were dubbed in Russian, so they could understand it. And the other films, Jeremiah Paul and Esther, were really good films because they had quite famous actors in. They weren't sort of what I would call Sunday school tea towel on the head jobs. They were proper, gritty films, and you knew when something was desperately wrong because it was not sort of covered over. The film was a genuine film about the message, and they really liked that. We shared it out over the week. And then I would use the next week, when I was doing the talks, to actually pick up some ideas from the film that we might expand on. So actually, it encouraged them to come for all 3 days, and then to come for the next week to hear what was going on. Now, at this point, I need to just disconnect my machine and do this, because I can't speak Russian. My wife is learning Russian, and she had enough Russian for the 3 months that we were there to actually say very basic statements to them, which they really connected with. They actually, if she made a mistake, they would actually say out loud what she should have said to help her. It wasn't just a laugh and fun and, oh, that was a bit silly, wasn't it? It was a really encouraging response from them. Thank you for doing this, but actually you should have said that. And that really works. But when I was asking this lady to do some things for me, she doesn't speak English. So I was thinking, well, how am I going to tell her what chapters in the Bible I want her to read? So what I found really worked was this. This is Matthew 25 in the NIV on my iPad here. So I had my iPad here and I connected it up, and we had it on the projector so that all of them could see it. And I would say to her, I want you to read verses 32 to 42. But she has to read it in Russian. And she wouldn't know what Matthew 25 meant at all. That wouldn't mean anything to her, nor would 32 to 42. So I would go, and there's the same bit in Russian. And I would say to her, I want you to read all of that in Russian. Now, I don't know whether you know, but can any of you read that? I know one person can here, but it's a completely different alphabet, absolutely, totally different alphabet. So it's not something, I mean, if I look at French, I can guess what it's trying to say, but with this, you can't guess it at all. It's just completely different. But she would know what I wanted her to read. Now, if we come back to the other projector. This lady was really helpful, and I developed with her a really close relationship over those, because she was virtually my helper every single day that I was there doing this. I would give her a script which I had on my computer, which was up on the screen in English, and I would spend the morning of the day that we were doing the talk writing my talk in full, because that's the only way she would be able to do what she needs to do. I had to write it in full and stick to it. I would then use Google Translate to change it into Russian. But there are real pitfalls with this, some of which are quite funny. So I would then take that Russian that I got out of Google Translate, put it back into it and translate it back into English. And that gave me some idea of the errors that Google would put into it, because I then got my English and its English at the end. And some of the things that it came up with were quite funny, and I'm going to mention those in a minute. But she was a very good reader. Now, I wrote, God is with us. And Google Translate gave me, God is in the USA. And I said, no, he isn't. He also said, we need to show some faith. And it came back with, show Vera some. Now, you might say, faith and Vera. You see, faith in Latvian or Russian is Vera. It's the same name. Is that right? There we are. So it had taken my word faith, which is what we are to demonstrate, as a person's name, and changed it to what the Russians would understand as Vera. But it doesn't. If I hadn't realised that, I'd have been saying something that they'd be going, what's he talking about? I don't know what he's saying here, and yet it's really important, because faith, I mean, that was the whole centre point of what I was talking about at that point. So you have to get it right. And you know, I said to you earlier that God does amazing things. Now, I might be speaking out of turn, but Irina is going to see if she can translate for us into Russian next time we go. And it changes the ball game, because a person can automatically, if they know their Russian and their English well enough, know that that interpretation is not right. They need to adjust it. And what was really good about Tanya is that she would look at what I'd put up on the screen in Russian and go, And you could see her mind going, and she'd alter what I'd written down to make it make more sense to her listeners. So she was doing it, but from a script. But it's much better if you can have a live translator next to you while you talk about something that's just come into your mind, which is really important, that you didn't put down in the script, that she can then say in Russian. Because if that's not possible, you're stuck with leaving that message out, because they never hear it. You're stuck with your script. So I really developed a close relationship with her. She is now retired. She's obviously quite well educated, but she lives here. That picture on the right. That picture on the right, to me, looks like a prison. But it is actually the Red Cross hostel in the centre of Riga. Now, Duncan and I went there 3 times, and they didn't like us in there, because we went to see her, because we were a bit worried about her health, so we wanted to talk to her. We got in there, and the first thing we saw were 3 yellow-coated guards who were maintaining order inside, and everybody else to do with the hostel itself were behind grills. No personal contact with the people in there at all, other than with these guards. there was a corridor off to the left, and people were sleeping on the floor of the corridor with just a blanket, no mattress, just a blanket. And one guy had the whole of his leg in plaster, and he was struggling to get down on the floor with his leg all stiff. And he's expected to sleep there all night because he's a homeless person. Some of them were having food. And I don't know whether any of you have read Dickens' novels, but the idea of the workhouse that Dickens describes in 18th century England looked like the food that they had. It was gruel. It was grey. It was just a mass of nothing. I couldn't tell you what it was. It was just a mash of something. It was revolting. I mean, the food that we were giving them was way, way better than this was. And yet this is a Red Cross hostel that they're living in. The EU, I said to you, give them €10 a month. To stay in this hostel for a month costs for 1 week costs €15.40. So it costs €15.40 per week, and they get €10 a month. What do you do? They're only allowed to live in there for 280 days a year. Now you might think, oh, that's all right, I'll have my winter there. No. They decide which days of the year you can stay there. And only some of them are going to be in the winter. So what you can guarantee is that some of the winter you're not allowed in there, even if you can pay for it. -30? Hands up who would like to sleep outside on a pavement at -30. I can tell you a story about that because I have somebody that I know where I live who was homeless in Newcastle, which is in the north of our country, and he was at that point an alcoholic, and he had to be peeled off the pavement in Newcastle because he was found sleeping there and close to death. And the only way they could get him off the pavement in the winter, when they found him, was to cut his skin away from his leg because it had frozen to the ground. And the temperature there in Newcastle is probably no more than about -12. And it goes down to -30 in these places. And some of them sleep under the bridges because they don't have a choice. These are our brothers and sisters. These are people who have